So yeah, I saw Maleficent. Um, it was it was a movie. It had characters. There was a three-act structure. The motivations were clear. Honestly, that's more than I thought I was gonna get when I walked into this, because everything about the trailer screamed. It reminded me of like Oz the Great and Powerful, Snow White and the Huntsman, Jack the Giant Killer, Hansel and Gretel, all that like fantasy shit that's been remade, for adults and dark and gritty, because that's makes perfect sense. That's all it looked like. And they were hanging the entire movie's dependency on Angelina Jolie is what it looked like. So I saw it, and honestly, it started off even worse than that. The narrator is cheesy and stilted, and she narrates the movie for about 20 minutes when it's all shit that you can clearly see with your own eyes. It goes on for about 20 minutes, and then it stops, and then, you can actually enjoy the movie. You can actually, enjoy it. Another thing was that this movie brings in the three fairies, the three fairy witches from Sleeping Beauty, and there's a whole segment where the three are taking care of little Sleeping Beauty as a kid, but they're so incompetent and stupid that Maleficent has to inadvertently save Sleeping Beauty from them. And it was funny for a scene, and then they do it like 3 or 4 more times, and I was like, oh no, is this going to be the whole movie? But then they stopped. I didn't like the three at all. I get why you have to have them in there. It's a movie about like Sleeping Beauty, but they were kind of a pain in the ass. It's a movie. It's an origin story about Maleficent, the villain from Sleeping Beauty, but they change it now. They're like, oh, here's the true story. Here's what really happened. She's not really a villain. She's really a good guy that's just misunderstood. I'm kind of like, really? Like, that's kind of a disservice to Maleficent. Like, one of the best things about her was that in the original was that there wasn't much to her. Like, how her simplicity was kind of part of her charm. Like, she was just evil for the sake of being evil. She looked like Satan. You didn't need much more than that. That's why she looks like that, is so that right away just without her saying a word, you're like, oh, that's our villain, huh? And she curses Sleeping Beauty because she wasn't invited. Like, that's how much it takes to set her off. So this could go down in history as being one of the most unnecessary movies ever. Seconded only by Rise of the Planet of the Apes. But Rise of the Planet of the Apes managed to actually, like, justify its existence a little bit. Some of its parts were better than it made out. Maleficent, its parts are pretty weak. They don't add up to much. Really, probably the strongest part is Angelina Jolie. But even then, she kind of goes back and forth from being like believably delicious evil and being kind of like Charlize Theron from Snow White and the Huntsman, where she's so over the top that she's hilarious. It kind of goes back and forth. They eventually... See, what pissed me off about Oz the Great and Powerful was that it kept trying to tie back in... It was a prequel that kept trying to tie in to the original classic Wizard of Oz. And yet it would screw up the continuity left and right, and it would break the characters down to like the simplest, most basic things. The biggest being, what they did with the Wicked Witch in that movie. They made her origin story was just... Her whole origin story could be summed up in 3 words. A woman scorned. And that was pretty much her entire character. Like, the whole reason she was the Wicked Witch. They started to do that with this in Maleficent, where the whole reason she turns evil and curses Sleeping Beauty is because a woman scorned by a boy. And that's it. But the reason why that this is different is because Maleficent from the get-go tells you this is a different story. This is different from what you were told. We are not going to tie this into Sleeping Beauty because as far as we're concerned that didn't happen. That was a fake. That was a that doesn't count. It's not canon. I'm not, odd thing is that Sleeping Beauty, the original, was better than this movie. So this movie, to me, is not canon. And I think a lot of people are going to join me on that. So it was slightly less awful than Oz the Great and Powerful because it didn't keep trying to constantly ruin the main, like, most interesting character in the series. I thought it was funny how they had to cook up some kind of a weakness for Maleficent. And they were like, oh, it's iron. Iron hurts her. And that was it. Like, there's no real reason for it. They just needed to give her a weakness. Even though that was never in, like whatever. I think really kind of my only big issue was that it turns Maleficent into, like, an anti-hero when really she didn't need to be. That kind of makes the character less interesting. Which is ironic because this is like a big 2-hour explosive adventure and yet it's dull and kind of just loud. My main issue is what it did Maleficent, and then the other thing was that the inconsistency of her powers. In one scene, she'll be able to raise up a wall of thorns to keep an entire race of people out. When really, if you had done that about 10 minutes prior, you could have stopped half the events of the movie from happening. But, like, she can literally turn a bird. She can transform a bird into a person and give him a personality and a soul, basically. Turn him from just like a mangy, low-life, stupid bird and give him a soul and a mind and a human body. And intelligence. Like, that's power. And yet she can't, like, regrow her wings. It's spoiled in the trailers that she loses her wings. She can't grow back her wings. She can't fight back against guys with armored shields. It's the problem, like, if anyone's ever played The Force Unleashed, it's the same kind of problem where, like, the CG cutscenes show you all the cool things that you can do, and then you can't do them. Like, you just conveniently run into enemies and cronies that just so happen to, you know, counteract the awesome powers that you were given. So it was kind of hard to buy. A lot of the stuff I was kind of like, can't you just wave your hand and make this go away or make that go away? You've shown you can do so much more with your powers. Like, I don't know. It kind of took a lot of the tension out of the movie. Granted, it probably would have taken a lot of tension out of the movie if she just waved her hand and waved everything away, but that kind of brings us to the point of, like, well, maybe this movie didn't need to exist at all. Granted, it still wasn't awful. I didn't want to slit my wrists. I didn't want to take NyQuil and just pass out for the rest of the movie, which I've done before. But at the same time, with ticket prices being like $10 each, I couldn't even, like, recommend, like, for like $8 a ticket. If you can find it like a discount theater for like $5 and you're curious and bored, sure, like, there's worse ways you could spend 2 hours, but you know what? There's also better ways you could spend 2 hours. Like, doing your laundry, or getting to that book that you've always been meaning to get to, but it just collects dust, or, you know, entertaining your pet for a little bit. Give a little love and attention to your little furry friend. I didn't mean for that to sound wrong. That sounded dirty.